Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So good morning, people here and people on the internet watching us. Today, professor from UW, Sapna Cheryan, and two of her students, Amanda Toos and Lauren Hudson, are going to be talking about women's underrepresentation in computer science. And in particular, they're going to talk about some of their research on topics such as stereotyping and how that plays into what we all know is a problem that affects our field. So Sapna received her PhD in psychology from Stanford University a couple of years ago, and she's been honored with a number of awards on her research, including the American Psychological Association's Dissertation Award, as well as receiving an NSF career grant to further study this important topic. So I'm pleased to introduce Sapna. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary, and I want to thank you all for coming. This is my third trip to Microsoft, and it's always a pleasure to come over here and hopefully be able to share the research with you and also hear from you about what you might think, feedback you might have about the research and other ideas that you've had that you might want to find out more about. I'm happy to help with that. So the title of our talk today is Debunking Stereotype, Explaining Women's Underrepresentation in Computer Science. And I'm just going to start off with kind of the goals of the presentation today, so just so you get a little bit of background. So one of the goals is to learn about the factors that contribute to underrepresentation. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different factors, but in my work, I really focus on one factor, and we're going to delve into that, and that is stereotypes, so assumptions or perceptions that people have about who computer scientists are and what they do, and how those perceptions can influence the career choices and the opportunities that people have. One of the things that I think is really important as a researcher is not only to do the research and publish in journals, but also to say something about how we can solve social problems. So what can we do from this research? What kind of interventions can we do in companies, for example, or in schools to try to recruit more women into computer science and engineering? And finally, I'm a social psychologist, which means that I do experiments. And whenever I give talks outside of social psychology, I always like to make the point that we can use experimental methods to try to understand issues that are going on in the world and try to remedy social problems. So hopefully you'll also get a taste for how we can use experiments in that way. All right, so I just want to start with a graph, and I usually start with this graph because I think it's really telling and very interesting. So this is the percentage of women who've been, percentage of undergraduate degrees that have been granted to women over the past few decades, starting in 1970s and going all the way until today. And it's across a few different majors, so biology, math, chemistry, and computer science. And what you can see is that if you look at biology, math, and chemistry, you can see that society's made a lot of progress in terms of incorporating women into these fields at the undergraduate level. So whereas they were underrepresented back in the 70s, these numbers have gone up to the point today where they're almost at parity in math and chemistry and actually getting more than half the degrees in biology today. But what I think is very interesting here is that computer science is a different story. So women haven't been fully incorporated into all domains in society. There's still many domains. For example, you can think of politics and other domains in society. And an example of one of those is computer science, where women are underrepresented still today. So they make up only about 20%, and actually this year's numbers are even less than 20% of the undergraduate degrees in computer science are granted to women. And interestingly, this proportion is decreasing as opposed to increasing. And so one of the things that we're really interested in is, okay, what's going on here with computer science, and why are women underrepresented, and also what can we do about that? But before I get into that, I want to just take a minute and talk about why we care. So why does it matter that women are underrepresented, and why do we want more women in computer science in the first place? And there's three reasons, the way I see it, is why we should care about having diversity, and specifically women in computer science. First of all, from the perspective of women, as most of you know, computer science jobs are frequently rated among the best, most lucrative, high status, respected jobs, and potentially with flexible hours. And so women are missing out on jobs that are potentially very good for them. Second, you might also know that there's a great demand for computer scientists in society. Computer scientists in many ways are the modern architects of our society, and we want more of them. And by having a limited talent pool, we're basically limiting the numbers of people who can enter the field. And so if we want to increase the talent pool, one way to do that is to increase the numbers of people who are interested in entering the field. And the third argument that's often made is that computer science is potentially missing out on other perspectives. And to illustrate this, I usually give an example. So some of you might be familiar with the airbag fiasco in the 1970s. And what this was about is airbags were originally designed by men. And because of that, they designed their airbags to be for a larger body type, so someone who's taller and bigger. And when the airbags actually got implemented in cars back in the 70s, they ended up hurting and even killing some women and children because they didn't think about designing for a smaller body frame. And people have argued that if they had had women on the design team, the women might have said something, or it could have been that the presence of the women would have reminded the men that they need to be designing for a broader population. And so this is the idea that we want people with different perspectives to be designing things for our future because they will design for a broader population. Okay, so those are some of the reasons why I think it's important that we try to recruit more women into computer science. So now the question is why and how do we do that? And understanding why women are underrepresented in computer science is really a matter of understanding two questions. And one is why is it difficult to recruit them into computer science? So sometimes this is called the pipeline problem. Why are women not entering computer science at early ages? And the second one is retention. So once women have chosen to enter, why do they tend to leave computer science at rates higher than their male counterparts? And both of these questions are important. My work actually focuses more on the recruiting question. And the reason I focus more on the recruiting question is because in computer science, it's known that girls are less interested in the field at all levels of education. So starting in elementary school and going all the way up through, that gap persists all the way through all levels of education. And it's been shown that the major reason that women are underrepresented in computer science is not because they're leaving the field, but because they never choose to enter it in the first place. I do also have some work on retention, and so I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about a study that I've done actually on female engineers to try to get at what the experience is of being a female engineer. But for the most part, my work really focuses on what can we do to draw women who are not already interested in the field into the field. Okay, so this is obviously a complicated problem with multiple factors. It's not like there's just one answer to why women are underrepresented in computer science. And the first thing that we actually wanted to do was kind of just get a survey of what the different factors are that could be impacting women and getting a relative measure of which factors might be more important versus less important. And so one of the first things that we did is we did a large questionnaire, and we've done this both at University of Washington and also at Stanford. And for all the studies I'm going to present, I'm just going to go over kind of high-level details. I'm not going to get too specific into the participants or every question that we ask, because just in the interest of time. If you're interested in finding out more details about any of the studies, you can just go to my website, and we have PDFs of all the papers. And I'm putting citations at the bottom, so you can just reference that paper if you're interested in getting more information about that study or any background literature on that. It would all be in the paper. And if you have questions about things in the paper, you're welcome to email me and ask. I'm always happy to start a conversation with people about the research. Okay, so for this questionnaire, what we did is we had about 600 undergraduates, and because I'm focused on recruiting, we took out anybody who was a computer science major. So we're really looking at the population of people who are not computer science majors. And what we did was a pretty simple study. So we just asked them about a few different majors. I'm just going to talk about computer science in this case. And we wanted to assess how interested they were in majoring in computer science. And then a bunch of different predictors that have been kind of forwarded by either previous literature or people's opinions about what might make a difference for what might explain why women are underrepresented. And we didn't do a set of all of the factors because there's just too many. So we picked the ones that we thought lend themselves well to a questionnaire design. So for example, perceptions that the field might be sexist in some ways. Some people have brought that up as a potential reason. How much people feel like their gender is valued in the field. So do you feel like being a woman is valued in that field? How well you think you'll do there in that field, and then how similar you are to the people in the field. So those are a subset of the factors that we examined for this questionnaire. And we asked both women and men these things, and I'll just show you just an overview of the results. So what you can see at the top is in terms of interest. So women expressed less interest in computer science than men did. So these are all 7-point scales except for GPA, which was regular GPA 1 to 4 scale. And so this kind of mirrors the pattern that we see in the world. Among an undergraduate population, women are just less interested, almost not interested in computer science at all. Men are significantly more interested. And then when it came to our factors, we saw that women perceived that there was more discrimination in the field of computer science than men. They also felt like their gender was less valued there. They didn't expect to do as well in the field. And they also perceived that they weren't as similar to computer scientists as men perceived they were. So this is just a bunch of factors, and what we were interested in doing is, and you can see here that all these things are going on, right? So these could all be contributing uniquely to women's underrepresentation in computer science, and there could be other factors that you might have thought of, for example, socialization, the fact that parents and teachers and counselors might direct women away from these fields because they don't think they're appropriate for them. There could be the fact that women are not exposed to computing at a young age as much as men are. So this is just some of the factors that contribute. What we wanted to do next was figure out if one of these might be stronger than the other, if one of these could predict women's interest better than the other, because if so, then that might be a good place to start in terms of looking at the reasons. So if we just look at our women and we look at what predicts their interest in computer science, you can see that all these things matter. But if we statistically control for all of them, so we can see which ones come out as the strongest, we see that it's this one here that really makes a big difference. So perceived similarity to computer scientists, the more women thought they were similar to computer scientists, the more interest they expressed in computer science. And if the women who didn't think they were similar to computer scientists, those are the ones who said, no thanks, I'm not interested in that field. So this is an interesting one because it's a social factor, right? It's like, how much do you think you're similar to the people in the field? It's about perceptions of similarity. And so we wondered, okay, why might women not feel similar to computer scientists? What is it about the image of computer science in their mind that might be preventing them from feeling like they have this connection to computer scientists? And so what we did is we turned to the question of stereotypes. And stereotypes are these perceptions that people have in their head, the kind of image that pops up quickly when you think about a certain field, like nursing or psychology or what, people have an immediate kind of reaction to what that is, what those traits are, what that person looks like. And that's kind of the image that we were interested in. So that image of computer science and how that image that kind of pops into people's minds, especially the minds of people who don't know anything about computer science, could that influence whether they make a decision to go into the field or whether they express any interest there? Okay, so I'm actually going to turn it over now to one of my students. So Amanda, she'll introduce herself, and she's going to talk to you for a few minutes about the stereotypes or the perceptions that students have of computer scientists.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda. I've been working as an undergraduate honors student in SEPNO's lab for about 3 years. And what I'm going to talk about is, in order to answer this question that SEPNO just posed, we first have to identify what are the stereotypes of computer scientists, or what are the perceptions that people have of computer science. And in this New York Times article, that question was answered by high school girls. When the reporters asked them to say what they thought of when they thought of computer scientists, they said that the nerd factor is huge. When high school girls think of computer scientists, they think of geeks, pocket protectors, isolated cubicles, and a lifetime of staring into a screen writing computer code. And I'm sure, as many of you know, this is a largely inaccurate view of what computer science as a field and the people in it are like. These are just examples of real computer scientists in our society who are nothing at all what these high school girls described. We have Corey New up here, who is the principal engine developer for Halo here at Microsoft, Kevin Rose, the founder of Dig. Down here on the bottom left, there's Pat Sillinger, who's a very prominent computer scientist at IBM. So if these are the real computer scientists, where are the high school girls getting this impression of the nerdy, geeky computer scientist? And what I'm going to talk to you about is examples in both the media and environments in which these stereotypes could have been communicated to those high school girls and people in general. So the first example I'm going to talk about is Geek Squad. Some of you may know of Geek Squad. They're people who work for Best Buy who come to your home to fix your computer if you have any problems. But here are some of their advertisements for Geek Squad. They say, "We've spent more time with Ubuntu than is socially acceptable, and knowing all about Linux makes us geeks. Helping you with it makes us Geek Squad." So this is a lot in line with what those high school girls were saying. This is like, you spend more time with computers than is socially acceptable. The fact that you know something about computers makes you a geek. The entire service is called Geek Squad, and it's surrounded around computers. It just really seems in line with what the perceptions of the high school girls had of computer science. Now, another example from the media is a more local example. It's those PEMCO Insurance Northwest profiles ads. I know I see them a lot on like the sides of buses and billboards in the Seattle area. And so one of their Northwest profiles is the ponytailed software geek. Now, here's the ponytailed software geek. He's got his long ponytail. He seems to have eyes only for his computer. He can be spotted in cubicles. This is a little blurb that they posted online about him. It says he is proficient in C++, Perl, and JavaScript, which is reasonable. Those are programming languages. But he's also fluent in Klingon, which is a Star Trek alien language. So, as you can see, what these portrayals of computer scientists in the media is a really powerful image of this geeky computer scientist, which could, for people who don't have real computer science role models in their lives, think this is what computer science is actually like. All right, so the last example I'm going to talk about is kind of different. Stereotypes can also be communicated to people through environments. Now, these pictures are from a computer programming company in Silicon Valley, and it has a kind of stereotypical environment. You can see in the upper left, this guy's office is filled with toys, video games, models, and down on the lower left is a rather impressive replica of the Golden Gate Bridge made completely out of Coke cans. And the point you should take from this, these pictures is not that having toys or video games in your environment is a negative thing. The point is that if your entire environment, your entire work environment or space that you work in is filled with these objects, someone who is novel to the environment and coming into the environment may make impressions based on those objects. And what these objects say to people is that this place is filled with a really specific interest that a diverse group of people may not be able to relate to. And as Septa mentioned, diversity in a field is very important, and we would want environments to relate to a more diverse group of people. So Lauren will actually be talking to you later about computer science environments and how they can actually impact people's impressions of the field itself. But for now, I'm going to pass it on to Septa, who's going to talk about research on these impressions of computer science.
Okay, so I'm going to present a couple of studies that we've done in my lab on this question of environments. And I'll just give you a little bit of background on why we went to environments. So I lived in the Bay Area before this, and now I live in Seattle. And so I've had a chance to visit a lot of tech companies. And I remember when I was in graduate school and I visited tech companies, I noticed that some of them really fit the stereotypical environment. So there was a lot of I remember a certain company had all their conference rooms named after Star Trek stuff, and they were just a mess, and the cubicles were a mess. And then other companies were just really beautiful, very colorful, very open, very spacious. I mean, they kind of look like, we walked through this building and it looks very nice. And I wondered if just walking through those buildings could communicate to people whether or not they would fit in those places. And so that's what led me to start the study of environments. And if so, can you change environments to change people's minds about what these places are actually like? And can you attract different people into a field by changing what the environments look like? So what we wanted to do is we wanted to test exactly that, and so we turned to experiments to do that. And so we did our first study at Stanford, and this was a kind of a smaller study. And what we did is we actually took a room in the Gates Computer Science building at Stanford, and we decorated the room. Okay, so we basically created an environment that either looked like the companies I had seen that kind of fit the stereotype, or looked like the companies I had seen that didn't fit the stereotype. So I'll show you some pictures. So this is the stereotypical room. So we put up Star Trek posters, and we had science fiction books, and we had the Coke can pyramids. And these were all things that we had asked other undergraduates what they associate with computer science environments. And these are the things they told us. So we just bought those things, put them in the room, and set them up this way. And so what happened is half the participants would come into the room, and they didn't know that this was part of the study. They just thought they were meeting us at the computer science department, and they were just, sitting in this room. And we, in fact, told them, sorry about all the stuff. We're sharing this room with someone. Go ahead and just ignore it. So we told them not to pay any attention to it, even though we knew that you can't walk into a room like this and not pay attention to it. So they sat there, and we just gave them a bunch of questionnaires to fill out. And I'll talk about what's on those questionnaires in a second. So half of them saw the room in this in this state, and the other half of them saw the room in this state, which was, we wanted to put the same number of objects because we didn't want it to be that in one case it was very distracting, in the other case it wasn't. But we wanted to pick things that undergraduates told us they didn't associate with computer science environments. So things like nature posters, neutral books, so like we had a phone book there, and then water bottles. So those were things that were not associated with computer science in the minds of our undergraduates. So half the people saw the room when it looked like this, the other half saw the room when it looked more stereotypical. And on our questionnaire, we just asked them how likely they are to major in CS, how much they'd considered majoring in computer science, and how interested they were in learning computer programming. And then we averaged these together and standardized them, and it became our measure of interest in computer science. And what we found is, even though it was a small sample, we got a really big effect here. So this is for our female participants. And just sitting in that room with the stereotypical stuff caused them to report less interest in computer science than sitting in that room with the non-stereotypical stuff. So just being there, just seeing those objects and associating that object with the computer science department was enough for them to say, you know what, I don't think I want to do this. This is not for me. And what we got with our men was a different pattern. So these two bars are not different from one another, so they expressed the same amount of interest regardless of what the room looked like. So they were equally interested in computer science, whether the room looked stereotypical or not stereotypical. And another way to look at these results, I think an interesting way to look at them is to see that this is kind of the pattern we see in the world, where women express less interest in computer science than men. But what we were hoping to do is if we can change the stereotypes, that we can cause women and men to express the same level of interest. And these two are even though it looks like women are expressing more interest, these two are not different from each other statistically. Okay, so that was kind of our first glimpse into how just changing environments might change people's attitudes towards the field. And we've since done this many times. We've done it by telling people that it's all women in the environment. So we said it's a company environment, and you want to you're trying to decide what company team you want to join. Both teams are all women. One company environment has the stereotypical stuff in it, the other one doesn't. What company team would you choose? And even when they know that it's women in both cases, they still prefer women still prefer the non-stereotypical environment. So we've done it in that case. We also now are moving it to doing using Second Life. How many of you know what Second Life is? Okay, pretty much everybody. So it's like it's a 3D online virtual world where you get an avatar and you can do everything you do in real life basically on it. And the reason we're using Second Life is because it affords us a lot of control, so we can actually create environments in Second Life, and we can watch our participants move through them and report on them. So it's actually a great research tool. The other reason we're using it is because, as many of you I'm sure know, Second Life is actually being used a lot now as an educational portal. So a lot of universities have set up campuses in Second Life because it's cheap and you can educate a lot of people for very little money. And what we noticed as we were going through them is that the universities vary drastically in what their spaces look like, because Second Life affords you this opportunity to create supernatural spaces in some cases, or whatever you want to do. And so one thing we know, so this is Ohio University, and they actually created pretty much a replica of their campus, so that they've got the red brick buildings. Does anybody recognize this one? Yeah, MIT, good. So this is MIT, also another pretty much replica of MIT. And then you've got campuses that are doing like crazy things, like this one's like you take a class on a beach with like a bonfire, and this one, these are floating chairs that you can sit in, and there's like tapestries and stuff. So one thing that we noticed as we were going through these different universities is that whoever's designing these things are probably just thinking about what they as individuals want to do, and maybe not thinking about that these designs might have implications for learning. And so that's the message that we kind of wanted to send with some of this work, is that you can, if you think about the way these spaces are designed, you might be able to change the design in such a way that it communicates to certain people that they're more welcome there, that they would fit there better. So what we did is we actually just set up a version of our rooms in Second Life. So we built classrooms and company environments in Second Life, and we just changed basically the decor. So in this case, it's a classroom. The classrooms are identical. They say, "Welcome to Intro to Computer Science" on the whiteboard, and we changed the objects that were in it to reflect either what undergraduates told us they associate with computer science environments, like this is a Spock head, and there's some like video game stuff over here, or what they don't associate, so like plants and art and nature and water bottles, things like that. And I'll show you a video that we have of the rooms. See if this works. It's just a pretty short video that you can kind of get the perspective of our participants. They walk in, they're kind of in a first-person view, so they don't see their avatar, and they can just kind of walk around the room. And this is the stereotypical room, so they see the Spock head, they see video game stuff, and the different posters and books. And then just a glimpse of the other room, so the non-stereotypical room. People tell us it looks kind of like a waiting area. Like a doctor's office waiting room. We tried to keep it as neutral as possible. We haven't done a case where we make a room really like feminine, for example. We haven't tried that yet. But what we were interested in is a room that doesn't fit the computer science stereotype, but doesn't necessarily evoke any other strong identities. So that's why we went with stuff that was pretty neutral. Okay, and what we found, we've done this, we've run over, I think, 1,500 people in a version of these studies now. And what we find across the studies is that when we give women a choice, so we show them both rooms and we say, where would you rather take this class, Intro to Computer Programming, they, about 75% of them choose the non-stereotypical room. They say, I'd rather take the class in this environment. And one thing I want to point out here is that it's not all women. So we always have a subset of women, usually around 25%, who like the stereotypical room. So we're not trying to say that all women are a certain way and all men are a certain way. We're trying to show overall averages and trends among this population. And so it could be that for some people, this stereotypical room, for some women, it communicates to them the same things it communicates to a lot of the men, which is this is fun, or this is techie, this is cool. But for the majority of women in this population, the women who aren't already interested in computer science, what you can see here is that they feel more comfortable, they feel more welcome, they feel like they fit better in the non-stereotypical room. And you can make the same case for men here, that not all men like the stereotypical room. So one thing that the stereotypes might be doing is driving away some men who might otherwise be interested in the field too. We've also expanded the research now to look beyond just interest, but also to look at how well people think they'll do in certain domains. So we say, how well do you think you would do in the class that looks like this versus the class that looks like that? And what we see is that in the stereotypical room, women expect to do worse than men in that class. And this is the pattern that we saw at the beginning, just the general pattern that women expect to do worse in computer science than men. But in this room, women's performance expectations rise to meet men's performance expectations. So they expect that they'll do just as well in the class as men will. And this is important because we know from other work in psychology that if you expect not to do well when you enter a certain environment, you're probably not going to do that well. So those expectations about how well you're going to do really contribute to how well you can actually perform in that environment. Okay, so at this point you might be wondering, well, why? What is it about these stereotypes that cause women to feel like they don't belong more than men? And I'll just read you a few quotes, and then I'll tell you the kind of theoretical perspective that we've taken. So this is from the former director of engineering at Intuit. She said, we'd go to lunch and they would just talk about tape drives and hardware and wires and machines. It was my first realization that I was with a bunch of people I had nothing in common with. And then some of you might know Jane Margolis and Fisher's book. This is from a female student at Carnegie Mellon, and they quote her as saying, it's like, oh my gosh, this isn't for me. I don't dream in code like they do. So this kind of idea that computer scientists are a certain way and I'm not that way. And then this is one of our female participants. So in many of our studies, we tell them that the class is identical in gender proportion, that there's equal men and women in both classes, and it's because we're really interested in the stereotype sometimes beyond just what gender it evokes. And so she told us, when I first walked into the classroom, and this is walking in on Second Life, into classroom A, all of the Star Trek and Star Wars memorabilia seemed pretty nerdy to me, and I don't want to be stuck in a class with all geeks regardless of their sex. So she's basically saying here, even if they're women in that classroom, I know they're going to fit that certain stereotype, and I don't want to be associated with that stereotype, or I don't feel like I fit with that stereotype. And so what you can see is going on is that when people walk into these environments, they're getting a quick sense of whether they belong or not. So they're looking at the objects, and they're inferring something about the people in that environment, and they're they're basically concluding or inferring from that whether or not they would fit and do well in that environment. And we've come to term that process ambient belonging. So it's the sense that you get when you walk into an environment, whether you fit with the objects in that environment and whether you would fit with the people in that environment. And sometimes as an analogy, I like to think about the first time that I visited Seattle, actually. So when I was on my job interview, and I was driven around the town, and I remember seeing all these like yoga studios and like ski racks on people's cars and people running, and I remember thinking, oh, this is kind of a place I could see myself. Like, I like all those things. I really feel like I could fit with kind of the Seattle vibe and the people in Seattle. And it's that sense that you can kind of get when you first visit a city. You don't necessarily have to talk to any of the residents to know whether you're going to fit in there. You can just kind of look around and get a sense from just the city whether or not it's a place that you can see yourself living. And it's that kind of feeling that we think that we're tapping into here when we talk about different environments and different work environments and educational environments too. Okay, so I just want to turn quickly to the question of retention and look at the experience of people who are already in the environment. So in this case, we've done a few studies on female engineers. We were interested to see, well, what is the experience of female engineers who have to contend with these stereotypes? Like, do they like them? Do they not like them? And we're still in the process of answering that question. But one thing that we've noticed just by talking to a lot of female engineers is kind of a salient experience that occurs a lot. And so we started to delve into this experience. We thought it was really interesting. And I just wanted to quote from a New York Times article. So this is the former CEO of Autodesk, and she said, "It was not uncommon for men in business meetings to assume that she was an office assistant, not a fellow corporate executive." So it's that idea that for a lot of women who are in these male-dominated domains, they aren't assumed to be in these domains because they don't fit the image of what that image is, like the male CEO or the male executive, or a lot of times female doctors report it too. They think they're mistaken for nurses a lot, and so it's this notion that you might have to always be proving that you have this identity. You have that extra burden of having to show that you actually have that identity, and so we've just done a quick study with female and male engineers. This one was done at Stanford. And we just asked them this: how surprised are people when you tell them you're an engineer? And then, what majors do strangers often assume you are? And what we found is that, maybe not surprisingly, female engineers reported being met with a lot more surprise upon revealing their majors than male engineers. So every time that they tell someone that they're an engineer, they're faced with a little bit more surprise, sometimes maybe a lot more surprise, than men when they say they're an engineer. And when we coded for what majors people often assume they are, so men say, yeah, I'm an engineer, and when I meet people, they assume I'm an engineer. And for women, the most common answer was, no, they assume I'm something else. They assume I'm a social science or a humanities major or something other than an engineer. And so women have to have this kind of extra, what I would say is probably a burden of having to prove that they're an engineer, not only to people who are strangers, but probably at the workplace too, having to show that you have those credentials. And we're looking at now how women cope with it. And there's just this interesting quote and book that I read recently. This is this female neurosurgeon. She wrote a book called Walking Out on the Boys, and she was always mistaken for a nurse, and she's like at the ultimate high-level neurosurgeon. And so she said, at times I'm tempted to wear a t-shirt embossed with "I am a brain surgeon" on it, because she was questioned so often that she just got sick of it. And so anyway, she ended up she was at Stanford. It's a really interesting book, an account of her experience there in kind of a very intense environment. And so she talks about this as one of the issues that kind of just got under her skin. Okay, so I just want to do a quick summary, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who's going to actually talk about interventions. So what we hope that our research shows is that the way a group is represented, so those public images, those stereotypes that are out there, those things can matter for who expresses interest in the group. So there's consequences for what images are out there of certain fields, and that these images are transmitted in a variety of ways. So the media is often the first thing that people think of how these images are transmitted, but we also wanted to make the case sometimes you can't control the media, you can't change what's out there, but you can think about what your environments say, or who the people are that are you're exposing to people who might be in the field. And so what we want to say is that stereotypes can be transmitted, but also stereotypes can be changed through environment. So if you have an environment that doesn't fit the stereotype, you can expose more people to it and show them that that's a way that to change the image of computer science. And by doing this, you can actually change who participates in the field. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lauren now, who's going to talk about some of the implications of our work, what it suggests for what you can do at the company level or at schools to try to change the image.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren and I'm an undergraduate at the University of Washington, and I've been working with Stepna in her lab for about 2 years. So a prominent stereotype about computer science is that computer science environments are really boring. When people think about computer science environments, they might picture these traditional classrooms and office spaces. They look pretty dull and boring, there's a lot of gray, and the computers are arranged into almost cubicle spaces that limit human interaction. But computer science environments are actually nothing like this. Engineering is really about being creative and using your imagination, and the environments have to facilitate this. So typically, computer science environments are really sleek, modern, and bright, much like this building. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you some pictures of actual computer science environments and how they definitely defy this stereotype. So here are some pictures from the Paul G. Allen Center for Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington. As you can see, these environments look nothing like the stereotypical environments. The building itself has beautiful architecture, the lounge looks inviting and comfortable, and the meeting room has an open layout that facilitates communication. And here's the Paul Allen Center's computer lab. This is a really great example of how our research can be used to easily and inexpensively transform a stereotypical computer science environment into one that is more inviting to both women and men. This environment actually used to be just as boring and stereotypical looking as a traditional computer lab. But what's really cool is that people actually read our research and changed this environment to be more welcoming to greater variety of students. As you can see, the walls are painted bright colors and display pictures of nature, and also the computers are now arranged in a way that makes it easier to do group work. A second major stereotype is that you have to fit the stereotype to be in computer science. So people think they have to look stereotypical, like this guy with his computer and glasses, and also act stereotypical, like this guy playing with his Nerf gun at his office. And while people like that probably do exist in computer science, the truth is that there's a broad range of looks, personalities, and talents within the field of computer science. Computer scientists are independent thinkers whose interests go well beyond computers. They change the world with their ideas and intellect. So for example, they create better prosthetic devices for people with disabilities. They help to improve forest firefighting techniques and to connect rural communities through technology. And it's important that we showcase these types of people to women because they can serve as role models to get women more interested in the field. In fact, role models play a really important part in the recruitment and retention of women in computer science. The National Academy of Engineering profiles tons of female role models such as these who work to try and inspire women to get more involved in math and science domains. But what's really interesting is that role models for women and girls don't actually have to be women. David Milan is a lecturer on computer science at Harvard, and he serves as an excellent example of a computer science role model for women. By teaching women in his introductory computer science class how exciting and diverse the field can actually be, he's really increased the number of women who are interested in this field. So we hope that just gives you a few ideas for how you can help to increase women's participation in computer science, and thank you for listening.
All right, thanks. So we want to open it up to questions for sure. I also just want to pass out, we have some brochures that we put together in our lab, so you can just get a little bit more information about what you can actually do in different spaces, and then on the back we have kind of the contact information. So if you're ever interested in contacting me, you can feel free. And we just started a blog, actually, so we would love to have you guys comment on the different, our latest blog post is on the Facebook movie, actually. So if you have any opinions about that you want to get out, that's a good place to get it out. And then I think Liz, I'll just introduce her for a second. So she's also from the University of Washington, and as part of the grant that we have, she comes to the different talks that we do, and she hands out surveys to kind of evaluate. So you don't have to fill it out, but it's just a one-pager, and if you have any suggestions about the talk that you heard today or other things that you feel like you'd like to have incorporated or about the materials, this is a great place to let us know about that. And then one more thing, and then I'll open up to questions. I'm also a member of the National Center for Women in Information Technology, which I know Microsoft is a part of, and so we have a bunch of materials. I'm not going to pass them out, but if you're interested in them, you can come up here and grab one. There's By the Numbers, which kind of gives you the statistics about women in IT, and then another like facts about women in IT, and then a couple of they're called practice sheets or these series things where you can actually go on their website and actually get these packages about how to be a good mentor to women or how to do hiring so that it's in a way that's not biased. So they have a lot of actual intervention type materials that you can use. So I'll just leave those up here, and you're welcome to just come up and grab them. So okay, so I will open up to questions. Anybody have anything? Yes.
Is it college too late? I mean, don't most of those stereotypes get created in high school or even earlier? I mean, I actually say I have a 13-year-old, so I do talk to the girls in his class all the time, and none of them are interested.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that's the difference in interest starts at a very young age, as young as you can ask, basically. The interest is there. And we started with college students in part because we're really interested in the major, in the computer science major. And what's interesting is that it's too late in the sense that, yes, the stereotypes are formed, but it's not too late to change them. Because even these college students are willing to say, oh, okay, I see that this is not exactly what I thought, And I think they're given so little information about various majors that if you can give them some information that's actually opposed to their perceptions, you can actually change it. But to your point, as part of this grant, actually, we do want to go into younger ages. So after we get everything set in the college ages, we're going to take some of these studies, make them simpler, and then take them to younger ages, maybe even middle school, to see what the perceptions are there and whether we can change them using the same types of interventions. Yeah. Very good question. Yes.
Within the topics that are taught in computer science, those could also be used as ways of encouraging women. So, for example, if it's something like operating systems, they might not be interested. But if it's something like HCI, where they can do design and you can tell even high school students, okay, you are on Facebook all the time, you can actually code Facebook, make Facebook better and stuff like that. So do you think that would be useful?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I talked a lot. Sorry.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah. So the question is, what about actually introducing women to various topics in computer science that might defy the stereotype? So she used an example of operating systems, which maybe fit the stereotype, versus HCI, which is maybe another way to draw more women in. And I think that's definitely a great observation. And there's been work in another lab about how the perceptions of, she doesn't only look at computer science, but she looks at other fields like physics and like astronomy, I think, and how those are seen as fields that are not helping fields. So undergraduates, she's also looked at undergraduates, have this perception that if you go into those fields, you don't want to help people as much as if you go into like medicine or law or fields like that. And so she's shown that fields that were male-dominated previously and have become now either equal or even female-dominated, in the case of, like, I think law is now female, and maybe even medicine. She thinks the reason for that is because people associate the work with helping people, like a more communal kind of thing. And so if you can do that with computer science, because computer science is all about helping people, if you can get that message out that this is what the field is about, maybe by thinking about what topics you teach, or by having a wider variety of subfields in computer science, then that could be one way that women could develop an interest there. So yeah, that's what she's argued. So I think that's a great point. Yes.
So I thought it was interesting that you showed a lot of trends that these interventions could increase participation of women, but at the same time decrease the participation of men. I know that you weren't getting statistical significance, but definitely trends were there. And it really disturbs me that it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be. So the data with men is interesting. When we show men one environment or the other environment, like we did in our first day, so they either see the room when it looks stereotypical or not stereotypical, they don't have a preference. And it's only when they are given an explicit choice between the two environments where they're like, okay, if I have the choice, I would rather go here, And so what we think is going on is, and we've asked all of our participants, we interview all of them after the study to be like, okay, why did you choose the room that you did? And what our men usually say is that room looked fun. Like that's the kind of the modal answer. Like it looked fun, it looked like the teacher was fun. Looked like there's video games, there's cool stuff to do, And so I think for them, it's not. I don't think the other room communicates a sense of I don't belong here, but I think the other room just kind of draws them in. And so I think what you can do is you can change your. I think there are some environments that can be exclusive to men, and I'm not saying we should design our environments to do that. But I think what we've tried to do is pick an environment that is both welcoming to women and welcoming to men. And it's only when they're explicitly given the choice of both that they're like, I like it here better. But it doesn't lower their performance expectations. And even if they see the environments independently, they're still just as interested. So it's really, I think, a matter of finding that right environment that communicates the broadest sense of welcoming. Yeah. It's a great question, though. Yes?
So one thing that this doesn't seem to explain is the chart that you showed at the beginning that shows this very strong drop in women in computer science. And what's particularly interesting about that is that a lot of the media has been working pretty actively to try to counter these stereotypes. So you had, in Jurassic Park, it was the girl that was that saved the day using the computer. In Sleepless in Seattle, it was the girl that knew how to use the computer. And also companies like Microsoft and others are often putting, giving examples of women and doing these things. And so how do you see, why do you see the things heading
Yeah, that's a
south?
great question. Okay, so I actually do have a slide on that. And I will show you what I think. Okay, so here's what I think. I think you're right, the media is trying, but I don't think they're trying all that hard. For example, Big Bang Theory, if any of you have seen that. Yeah. When we blogged about the Facebook movie, we did note how the portrayal of women in that movie was not very positive. So I think there's still a lot out there in the media, and Amanda showed you examples of ads that are still kind of like, using the stereotype. So I don't think, the reason I put this at the end is because I am not a historian, I'm not a cultural historian, so I don't have data to support this, but I was interested. I was like, okay, what was going on in the mid-'80s that might have caused this, and could it be the stereotypes? And so I just did quick searches of what the movies were that were out at this time, and like Weird Science is in there too. There's just a lot of movies that kind of portray that image to women and to men, and I think this is maybe the time when that stereotype really crystallized. The media probably was attaching to kind of the PC revolution and things like that. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates stuff. So like kind of the individual who works really hard in their garage and just like creates this, works all night. And I think this is that time when that stereotype really crystallized. And so that could be one of the explanations. So I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people trying to do a lot of stuff out there. I know, like for example, NCWIT is trying to really. They have a whole campaign to change the image, and that's what we're trying to do too, is change the image. But I think there's still a lot out there where if you ask people who don't know much about computer science what the first image that comes to mind, it's really that computer nerd image that comes to mind for them. And so whatever the media is doing, it's not doing it enough. Yeah, it's not changing it enough. That's what I would have to say about that. Yes.
Just as a note to that, I was at the Microsoft company store a few days ago, and when I checked the t-shirts for women and men, there was always this geek sign on the back of the t-shirt, and I couldn't find any t-shirt that even had that. And I'm just not convinced that we're trying hard enough to change these stereotypes, given that the biggest computer science company is putting the geek image to every t-shirt they put into the company store.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. It's hard because some people really like it. The image is not. This is a tricky area because it's not like overt racism or overt sexism where everybody thinks that's bad. Like the image, it's fun. Some people relate to it really well. So there's probably a lot of people who like the image, and who want to own it as their own. So this is why it's tricky. And I think like the message from this research is we're not necessarily saying that like nerds are bad or anything that what we're saying is that if this is the image, these are the consequences of that image, for people who are not in the field. And if if you can do things to overcome that image in other ways, then maybe those things are okay. But if you want to actually change the image, then those things it might be good to actually have some T-shirts that show other things too. So we're not saying necessarily get rid of all that stuff, but add some other stuff to make that image broader. Yeah. I'll go back.
Have you done any research on perceived work-life balance in the field and how that affects whether women want to go into the field? Because I have brothers who are in the health sciences profession, and they have friends, and I have friends, and it just seems to me like they can have kids work 1 day a week or 2 days a week or take some time off while their kids are young and then jump right back into the field, and that was a big driver, I guess, in encouraging them to go into that path, whereas in computer science professions, I don't really see, you have family leave, but you don't have the ability to work 1 day a week or 2 days a week and then come back, for a full time.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I haven't looked at work-life balance perceptions myself, but I think one thing I always try to think about is, okay, are there fields where the work-life balance is not so great that women are entering? And I think there are. So I think medicine is a pretty good example of one where, at least in your childbearing years, you are working a ton of hours and you don't have any control over your schedule and you're working in the middle of the night and
dependent on the field.
Yeah, you can go into ER.
Occupational therapists.
Yes. Oh yeah.
To have a lot of options to work in schools, to work in to work in the hospital or so it depends. Yeah, if you're a resident or going to be a surgeon, right. Definitely it's different.
Right.
So.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, I'm sure that comes into the decision somewhere, and I think it would be really interesting to study those perceptions. But I guess from what we've talked to our undergraduates about, I don't think they perceive computer science as a inflexible. I think they perceive that you can work at home and code. I think that's more. I would say they probably have more perceptions that law is a family unfriendly field. But I think it's a great point. I mean, I think it would be really interesting to actually do more than just interviews, but actually do an anecdote, like a survey to see okay, which fields are actually the best for having a family and which ones aren't. Yeah. Could be another part of the image to try to get out there, nobody works on Fridays or whatever, or at least they work from home.
A lot of people.
True. Yep.
So just to add another factor to especially at UW, I'm not sure how things work at UW, but to consider if rearranging Paul Allen Center brings in more women into the classes. I taught at Irvine before I came here. And we had fewer and fewer women majors in computer science, and so we did a study of what was going on. And what seemed to be going on there was that if you looked at the intro classes, just drove them out, and they were incredibly brutal because their main purpose was to flunk people out in order to get fewer people, the number of people that the labs could actually manage in the upper division classes. And the women were doing just as well as the men in those classes, but they were looking around and saying, I don't want to live this way. I mean, it's just, there's no point in this, and there are other things I can do with my life. So I think this is great, but also take a look at the rest of the environment, because even if you bring them in, there can be things that will, can drive people out.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I mean, and there's actually a big movement to change intro classes now, and so Harvard is a good example of they've actually increased their numbers by 33% of women, so they're at the highest ever CS50, which is a notoriously difficult class enrollment, and I think people are recognizing that the environment in the classes needs to change, like the competitive nature or the Weedout environment, and you're right, it's kind of a well-known fact in social science that women will do just as well or sometimes even better than men, but they will drop out first, so it's not about they can't do it or they don't have the capabilities. It's really about that choice of I just don't want to be here, or there's something else I'd rather do. Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, Elizabeth.
Have you researched the impact of how kids in schools are being brought up, both boys and girls, and how that impacts their decision going forward in colleges? I have a little, a tiny example about volunteering in a middle school teaching math last year, and I noticed that there were many boys who were interested in math than girls were, and going forward, girls were not even like encouraged to take mathematics in higher grades. So is there like a bias that's put in their brains early on? Because I grew up in India and there was no option of dropping math at any point till 12th grade. I had to always do it. So I see that there are girls here who are scared of it, and it's kind of imbibed in their systems that that's not for you, that's for like boys kind of a thing. So
yeah, I haven't studied that myself, but there are a lot of researchers who have. I can point you to some of their stuff if you're interested, and they've shown exactly what you say, which is that even at very young ages, girls associate math with boys, and the more they associate math with boys, the less they want to do it, and then they get that. Sometimes parents and even teachers can communicate, even though they don't mean to, they can communicate indirectly to girls that this isn't for you, or are you sure you don't want to consider English, or things like that. And there was a study that came out recently that showed that teachers' own anxiety about math can transfer to their female students. And so if teachers themselves have, even at the very young ages, have some anxiety, their female students can pick up on that and then internalize that anxiety themselves. So there's a lot of forces that are going on even outside of people's conscious control that are kind of conspiring to make it so that it's harder for girls to want to stay in that field. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned India, because I think one of the things that people have started to talk about now is cultural differences, and whether the fact that we have so much freedom and choice in America is actually magnifies the gender differences, because instead of just forcing people to just all do math or computer science and be like, oh, I'm actually good at this, or I actually like this, we give people so much choice that people can make choices according to the stereotypes or according to the messages they get from the external environment. If we just didn't give them a choice, then we might be able to overcome those stereotypes. So it's an interesting, perhaps unintended consequence of American freedom, and choice. So yeah, so people are starting to think about those cultural differences now. It's a good question. Yes.
So last year, Patel came out with computer engineer Barbie.
We blogged about that too.
Oh, so maybe you already. I didn't read that blog post, but so the way they did it was they had her have like a hot pink computer glasses, and so in some ways they sort of fit this stereotype. But on the other hand, it's like Barbie, which is a traditionally where you're feeling girls type thing, and so maybe you can just summarize your blog post and the thoughts and whether that's net positive for encouraging girls to see that that's a valid career option, or on the other hand, it sort of encourages those stereotypes of computer glasses.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and we've had a lot of discussion about this in my lab about whether computer engineer Barbie is good or not. And I don't think there's one dominant view. Actually, I think some people think exactly what you said, which is that she's kind of promoting this, why does she have to have glasses? Why does she have some people think she's super cute. Oh, this is definitely going to get girls interested because you can be that, you can fit that image, but in a kind of feminine way. So I actually don't feel. I mean, I'm glad that. I like the fact that Barbie is computer engineer because she's been everything else, so why not let her be a computer engineer too, so I think that's great. And the girls who play with Barbie, hopefully will at least know about the field a little bit because of that. But I do think it's interesting that I know they put a lot of energy into thinking about what is she going to look like, and they consulted with women in tech groups to find out okay, we want her her just to be Barbie in a skirt, or whatever. But then it's interesting, well, why can't she just be Barbie in a skirt? So it brings up a lot of interesting issues, and I don't think I come down strongly on whether it's net positive or net negative, although I do think it would be really interesting to do a study where we go give computer engineer Barbie to young girls and see what they say about her and see if it changes their interest. And so short of doing that, I don't know if it's net positive or net negative, but I do think it definitely brings up a lot of. It kind of summarizes all those issues. It's like in an actual physical product, you have all the issues around the about women's participation in computer science that come there. So I'm glad it's out there because I feel like it starts a lot of conversations. Yeah. Yes.
Our own Mary Schwinski was on the committee that helped design the clothing for Barbie. So you ought to ask her about her experience. The one thing I remember from my brief conversation with her about it was the original costuming was a white lab coat. That was they had truly no idea what to put her in, and so fortunately Mary and other women and other men too helped put together this thing. The other part I think that's really interesting about the Mattel thing is computer engineering Barbie had so many votes. It was one of the biggest vote things that they've ever had, but it was almost all adults. And so the girls themselves did not vote for her. They voted for journalist Barbie, you know, TV personality Barbie. And so what Mattel did, which from a marketing perspective, I understand why they did it, but from just a new Barbie kind of perspective, I'm a little angry about it since we were number one. They're issuing both Barbies. And so, you know, so as a parent who goes and buy, you know, I don't buy them. But, you know, if you were a parent and you were going to choose one or the other, are you going to pick the one that your daughter wants, or are you going to pick the one you think is good for her? You know, so it's you know, it's going to be an interesting
natural experiment,
yeah,
kind of. Yeah.
Just how many of these engineering, computer engineering Barbies are sold? Although I think adults are buying them instead of the girls.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, I got one as a kid.
Cool, play with it.
Yeah, it's in the box. But you know, I think it was really interesting that Mattel actually came up with that, but they saw results and didn't market to their actual target audience.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you guys got. I definitely got the vote for Computer Engineer Barbie.
Oh yeah,
forward.
I don't know, lists and everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's interest there in trying to get that message out to girls, and whether girls are receptive to it or not, that's a different. I guess a different question.
Yeah.
I have a comment alluding to the cultural differences stuff. So again, growing up in India, going to college, I heard quite a lot of parents be concerned about their daughters being independent, and for the mass middle class, having a good education and having a job was the way to independence. That was one aspect of it. But the encouragement that I saw parents give their girls was also that, hey, if you're going to be in a good school, if you're going to be surrounded by smart people, there's a possibility that your suitor is going to be smart, is going to be well educated, is going to be well settled in life. So you need to work your grades up to be for the long term thing.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not sure if that's kind of the mentality parents have here or not.
No. I don't think they're like, oh, if you go to computer science, you might meet a better guy than if you go into psychology or whatever.
They've seen the movies.
Yeah, they might have those stereotypes too.
Especially knowing that the classes and the course is so rigorous, right? You'll end up having these study groups, you'll end up spending so much time with your friends that you might eventually land up like understanding their lifestyle, being more empathetic towards people from your class, and then eventually like finding someone in that space.
Right, yeah.
Because then it kind of makes the rest of your life easier.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's maybe a parent marketing message.
Yeah.
Give your kids the best chance of meeting a spouse. Yeah.
So I want to make one more comment about program, because I think it's important. And we actually have a pretty critical example in Microsoft of a technical program that's failing women. So we actually have this Microsoft valued professional program, MVP program. And it primarily covers our technical server products and our developer products. And a call went out about a week and a half ago to all the technical women at Microsoft that says, please, can you mentor someone in the program? We have for SQL Server, we have less than 2% of the MVPs are women. Overall, less than 3% of the MVPs are women. And, you know, the response was, oh, if you mentor a woman, she'll become an MVP. And, you know, my response to the program was, well, the program's wrong, right? Which is, if it's that, you know, kind of like prejudicial against getting women in the program, are you looking at the program, right? So the only reason it's important, and it has some of this bigger effect, is we fly these, I can say the word guys, because there's practically no, we fly these guys in. We give them leather jackets, we give them software. You know, we pay for them to like advertise their skills and services all over the world. And so, you know, this kind of thing that we're perpetuating is, oh, the most valued people we have at Microsoft and our most valued partners, they're all men. Plus the less than 3% women, right? And so, you know, I don't know how much, you know, that kind of perception permeates through younger kids, but I got to imagine that, you know, that there's still some kind of residual effect on it.
Yeah.
And it goes back to programming.
Well, yesterday, did you see Brian Nosik's talk on unintended bias?
No.
It was really pretty interesting because it talks about you're trying to do the right thing. I mean, the MVP program, you know, the vision of it is the right thing. You know, we're going to bring best people together and help promote blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that when you make MVP, people who think about nominating people to be MVPs don't sit there and think for hours about who do I know that would be good at this. They think about the first name that comes across their brain, and it's typically a man. And so while it isn't necessarily there aren't any women, it's that they're not front of mind. And so you never get to promote women in that sense. So it's an unintended bias. The person's not being a bad person, not saying this woman isn't qualified, it's just they're not thinking about it. And so there's a whole literature on, unintended bias and gender. Tony Greenwald is at UW, is a partner of Brian's that does this kind of work. It's really interesting to think about how this all happens. And so you have to think about these are not bad people. People are not bad. It's just that they don't think about process that can help them not do that. One of the things, I was at the University of Virginia before I came here, and one of the things we used to do when we were doing faculty hires, because I was the only woman on faculty for many years. And so what we did, the chairs finally said, we're not going to interview anybody until we have 3 viable women in the pool. Whether we invite them to interview or not is a different thing, but we are going to find 3 women candidates that are viable within our pool. And you know what? There was one year we hired 2 women. I mean, all of a sudden, when you really look and say, these women are above bar, you just need to dig deeper, but you have to be conscious that that's something you're going to do. And that's where I think this unintended bias in all of these programs we have that have so few women, it's really that, think about it.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. And it just actually reminded me of a study that came out that looked at recommendation letters and among assistant professors, and showed that when people write recommendation letters for women, they write less good. I mean, it's not that they mean to, but they just talk about how nice she is, and how instead of talking, and they don't use words like superstar. They're much more likely to use those for men. And so when you're making a hiring decision and you see all these things, you're like, okay, you're kind of equating the recommendation letters, but it suggests that really women's recommendation letters are unfairly biased down by the people who write them, who don't intend to do that, but that's just because of the automatic things that come up that they associate with women. Like, oh, she's so nice, or she's such a good team player, as opposed to she's revolutionizing the field, or, and so that can prevent women from getting up to those top levels too. Yeah. Yes?
I have a question. So one of the things that we did at the school I attended was carve out basically a specific class just for women who are interested in computer science, which more or less was like, here's some really cool stuff you can do. Is there any evidence saying that that's basically a good thing or a bad thing? I could sort of see it from both directions because it piques interest, but it also sort of isolates everyone out at the same time.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think there's evidence for whether those are good or bad. Stanford had a class like that. I used to attend it. It was in engineering, actually, on computer science. It was through the mechanical engineering department. I don't know if you ever attended it, but theirs was more focused on let's bring in speakers to talk about like work-life issues and things like that, as opposed to like showing them that there's other things. But I think I would say the general sentiment is that it's good to have a place where you can meet people who have the same maybe barriers that you have, so you can talk about them and you know that you're not alone, you're not facing these things alone. But I think it's a really great observation that sometimes what happens is those groups can become segregated and miss out on some other stuff, And so it's very tricky to do that in a way that, I think one key is those groups should be valued. Like the institution should value those groups. They should expose them to the same types of things that everybody else is exposed to. They shouldn't be like this kind of like fringe group that the institution kind of looks down upon, because that's when things can start getting bad, when you take a group of people who are already potentially underrepresented in a population, that you further marginalize them. But I've seen groups that have institutional buy-in. For example, you actually make a class as opposed to just having a group where the institution actually sponsors them or funds them, and it becomes a place where people can talk about those issues. I think those can be very valuable. But I think there are some cases where they can quickly morph into harmful for the people in the group. Yeah. Yes.
Have you looked at, for the women that do enter computer science, what are there trends there? I know for me personally, I went to all-girls middle school and high school. I set up special math classes for me, female mentors, and then when I got to college, I was told, well, women shouldn't be in math by my male professors, and if I hadn't had that background, that base, I wouldn't have pushed through.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, are there trends like, do females who enter typically have cheerleaders on their side, supporters
Yeah.
or advisors or mentors or...
Yeah, that's a great question. There are people who do research on that, and I think people in the field can usually point to a mentor who really helped them, kind of directed them towards the field and gave them, like kind of inoculated them, like you were against the messages that they might hear later on. The girls' school versus co-ed school is a really interesting question. I don't know.
There's a lot of research on that.
There is. I don't know if it specifically relates to computer science. I've never seen anything that actually has looked at computer science. Do you know, Ray?
It talks more about the percentage of women who go to have this all-girls experience. There's a much higher percentage who go to science versus girls who go to co-ed schools. I mean, just random co-ed schools. I mean, we're not talking about ability levels or anything. But part of what they're saying is because at an all-girls environment, they're not in a social situation where they're learning that they're not accepted in science or math. And so that they're just there as part of everybody's doing it, and everybody just happens to be all girls. So they say that it's good for every level. I mean, they say that in Congress, I don't know the numbers anymore, but in Congress, the number of women we have in Congress, this huge percentage of them had all-girl experiences. I mean, something that you would never expect. Even in medicine, even in all these different fields, if you look at the backgrounds of a lot of these women, they've had all girl or women experiences, whether they went to women's college, women's high school, middle school. And so it's an interesting phenomenon to think about. And there are some public schools that are actually going to having all-girl math classes because they want to increase, the math for their girls. But I think the jury's still out on whether that's the way to do it.
Right. Yeah.
People are choosing which way they think.
Right. Yeah. Because it would be great to be able to randomly assign women to, like, you go to an all-girls school and you go to co-ed school, and then we'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, I think the suggestions are that if you've had this environment, it could be good, but it could also be that your parents chose that for you because they know that they knew about the stereotypes they wanted.
And they also had more money, and they also had homes that encouraged good study behaviors and whatever. So
yeah. But maybe some of these math classes will do that. I mean, they'll kind of like assign people to them instead of letting them choose. I mean, I don't know. That's probably not what they're doing, but there's maybe more way to study that question within the same school as opposed to, But yeah, it's a really good question.
Well, let's thank Sapna for